My new husband's teenage daughter looked my mother up and down and called her ghetto, right in the middle of a crowded country club. When I turned to my husband and asked him to handle his child, he slammed his whiskey glass on the table and humiliated me in front of everyone. "She is not your daughter, Cecilia," he sneered. "Do not correct her. You do not have the right." I did not cry. I did not scream. I just smiled the coldest smile of my life and said fine. By the next morning, her luxury SUV, her college tuition, and his entire fake lifestyle were completely gone. Let me tell you exactly how I dismantled a parasite. We were gathered in the private dining room of the most exclusive country club in Buckhead, Atlanta. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the crisp white linen tables. Tonight was supposed to be a magnificent celebration honoring my parents. Elijah and Shirley were celebrating 40 years of marriage. They were true pillars of our community. My father had spent decades running successful community outreach programs, helping underprivileged youth find their way in the world. My mother was a highly respected choir director known for her grace and unwavering dedication to her faith. They had worked incredibly hard their entire lives to provide a solid foundation for my sister Monique and me. But the elegant and joyful atmosphere was completely ruined by the blaring, obnoxious noise of a smartphone. Raven! My 19-year-old stepdaughter sat slouched heavily in her chair. She was scrolling through social media with the volume turned all the way up. The chaotic audio of viral trends and loud music clashed terribly with the soft jazz playing in the background of the restaurant. She wore a custom silk designer dress I had paid for and expensive diamond earrings I had gifted her for her birthday just last month. Yet she could not even pretend to be present or polite for one single evening. My mother Shirley tried her best to make polite conversation. She leaned across the table with a warm and patient smile, trying to bridge the gap. "Raven, sweetheart," my mother said gently. "How are your classes going at Spelman? We are so proud to have another young woman in the family attending such a prestigious and historic institution." Raven did not even bother to look up from her brightly lit screen. She rolled her eyes dramatically and popped a piece of complimentary bread into her mouth, chewing loudly. "I am just trying to survive it," she mumbled, her voice full of disdain. "The dorms are completely outdated, and honestly, the people there are so basic. It is exhausting being around people who act so uncultured and ghetto all the time." My father Elijah frowned deeply, but kept his composure. He has always been a man of quiet dignity, choosing his battles wisely. Monique, my sister, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, shooting a glare across the table. Next to her sat her husband Liam. Liam is a sharp and highly successful white man who works as a top-tier trust and estate attorney in Georgia. Liam raised an eyebrow but remained perfectly silent, watching the dynamic unfold with intense scrutiny. He always observed everything before he acted, analyzing every detail. I forced a polite smile and leaned toward Raven, hoping to de-escalate the situation quietly. "Raven, please lower the volume on your phone," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "This is a very special dinner for your grandparents. We should all be present and respectful of the occasion." Raven scoffed loudly and finally looked up, glaring at me with pure contempt. "They are your parents, not my grandparents," she snapped, her tone sharp and aggressive. "And honestly, this whole setup is so ghetto. Who even eats at this place anymore? It is incredibly outdated, just like them." The entire table went dead silent. The jazz music suddenly felt too loud. My mother lowered her gaze, looking down at her plate as her hands trembled slightly in her lap. My father gripped the edge of the large mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. I felt a sudden massive surge of heat rush to my face. The absolute audacity of this teenager to sit at a table I paid for, eating gourmet food I purchased, and insult the very people who raised me was completely unfathomable. I turned my head to look at my husband Xavier, fully expecting him to intervene. Any man with a shred of integrity or respect would immediately discipline his child for speaking to elders that way. Xavier always presented himself as the ultimate refined businessman. He wore a pristine, tailored Tom Ford suit that I had bought for him just last week. He carried himself with the supreme arrogance of a self-made millionaire, constantly boasting about his elite investment consulting firm to anyone who would listen. I waited for him to speak up. I waited for him to demand a swift apology from his daughter. Instead, Xavier took a slow, deliberate sip of his expensive bourbon. He set the heavy crystal glass down on the table with a loud thud that echoed in the silent room. He did not look at Raven. He looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, flat, and utterly dismissive. "She is not your daughter, Cecilia," he said, his voice dripping with condescension and authority. "Do not correct her. You do not have the right." The air in the room grew heavy and suffocating. Monique gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Liam placed a calming hand on my sister's arm to keep her seated, but his icy blue eyes locked onto Xavier with the calculating, dangerous stare of a lawyer preparing for absolute war. My parents sat frozen in shock, unable to process the blatant disrespect. Xavier just smirked, leaning back comfortably in his chair as if he had just masterfully put me in my proper place. Raven smirked too, mirroring her father's arrogant expression perfectly, and turned the volume on her phone back up. In that exact moment, time seemed to slow down to a crawl. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the urge to scream or throw my wine in his face. Instead, my mind flashed back over the grueling journey of the past decade. I remembered the freezing nights I spent sleeping on the hard concrete floor of a cramped, leased office building downtown. I was in my 20s, pouring every ounce of my physical and mental soul into writing code and developing complex financial algorithms. I sacrificed friendships, family gatherings, vacations, and sleep to build my financial technology startup from absolutely nothing. I faced endless crushing rejection from venture capitalists who flat out did not believe a young Black woman could revolutionize artificial intelligence in the financial sector. I fought tooth and nail for every single dollar of initial funding, refusing to take no for an answer. Then Xavier appeared. He swooped into my life right as my company was catching major industry attention and gaining traction. He played his role flawlessly. He presented himself as the ultimate supportive partner, the strong, successful king who wanted to build an empire by my side. He manipulated his way into my heart, offering encouragement when I was exhausted and convinced me we were an unstoppable power couple destined for greatness. But the cold, hard truth was a bitter pill to swallow. A few months ago, I successfully sold my startup for $85 million. And ever since that monumental day, Xavier had slowly and methodically drained my accounts under the guise of partnership. He claimed his consulting firm was waiting on big payouts, but he constantly needed working capital to secure massive deals. I had funded his luxury wardrobe, his expensive club memberships, his lavish dinners, and his daughter's wildly excessive lifestyle. I had been their personal bank while they paraded around Atlanta playing wealthy elite socialites entirely on my dime. The realization hit me with absolute staggering clarity right there at the dinner table. They did not love me. They did not respect me. They viewed me as nothing more than a host organism to feed their parasitic existence. And now Xavier felt so incredibly comfortable in his false authority that he believed he could humiliate me in front of my own family without any consequence whatsoever. I looked at the man I had married 14 months ago. I looked at the spoiled teenager who was currently attending one of the most expensive colleges in the country, using my hard-earned money to pay for her status. I felt a strange sense of absolute tranquility wash over my entire body. The illusion I had been living in was violently shattered, and with the illusion completely gone, I was entirely free. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before it strikes its prey. It was dead behind the eyes and completely void of any human emotion. "You are absolutely right, Xavier," I said, my voice soft and perfectly controlled, echoing slightly in the quiet room. "She is not my daughter. I apologize for overstepping my bounds." Xavier looked incredibly smug. He picked up his bourbon again, clearly satisfied that he had established his dominance in front of my family. He truly thought he had won the power struggle. He thought I was submitting to his authority to keep the peace and protect our public image. Raven let out a short, triumphant laugh and went back to scrolling on her phone completely unbothered. My mother looked at me with deep, agonizing concern. "Cecilia, honey, you do not have to apologize. My mother whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I placed my hand gently over hers, offering a reassuring squeeze. "It is perfectly fine, Mom," I assured her, never breaking my calm facade. Xavier made a very valid point. I should not try to parent someone else's child. It is not my place. I stood up smoothly, pushing my chair back against the thick carpet. I smoothed out the invisible wrinkles in my silk dress and picked up my designer clutch from the table. "If you will all excuse me for just a moment," I said gracefully. "I need to visit the ladies' room to freshen up. I will be right back." Liam caught my eye as I turned to leave the room. He gave me a barely perceptible nod of understanding. He knew exactly what was happening behind my calm exterior. He recognized the dangerous shift in my demeanor. I walked out of the private dining room, my head held high, my posture perfect. I did not rush. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a woman who completely controls her own destiny and holds the absolute power to destroy worlds. The restroom in the country club was completely empty and totally silent. The pristine marble counters gleamed under the soft, expensive vanity lighting. I walked over to the large mirror and looked directly at my own reflection. I took a deep, cleansing breath, letting the final remnants of my emotional attachment to that man leave my body forever. I was Cecilia. I built an entire tech empire from scratch. I negotiated with the most ruthless corporate executives in Silicon Valley and won. I was absolutely not going to be played for a fool by a fake consultant in a borrowed suit. I opened my clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen and opened my primary wealth management banking application. The highly secure dashboard loaded instantly, showing the massive 8-figure balances I had worked my entire adult life to securely build and protect. I navigated directly to the section managing authorized users and joint spending accounts. My fingers moved swiftly over the screen with practiced, cold precision. First, I selected the unlimited black card I had issued to Raven. She used it daily to buy designer bags, expensive meals, and fund her wild weekends out with her sorority friends. I tapped the screen firmly. Card canceled permanently. Next, I went to the recurring payments portal. I found the scheduled automatic transfer for her Spelman College tuition. The upcoming semester was due in exactly 3 days. The amount was $28,000. I swiped left on the transaction. Payment deleted. Then I opened the auto loan management portal. The custom white Mercedes G-Wagon she drove so proudly to campus every day was leased strictly under my name and my corporate umbrella. I selected the active lease agreement and hit the option for early termination. I authorized the heavy penalty fee without blinking an eye. Repossession order initiated for immediate pickup. Finally, I turned my undivided attention to Xavier. I opened the Platinum Business credit card account he used to fund his lavish business lunches, his expensive golf memberships, and his high-end habits. I selected his name and completely revoked his authorization. I then pulled up the management system for our gated Buckhead mansion. The deed was entirely in my name alone. I drafted a quick, highly detailed email to my property manager and my private security firm instructing them to prepare a strict 30-day eviction notice for Xavier and Raven to be delivered immediately upon my explicit command. It took less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes to completely sever every single financial artery, keeping their lavish fake lifestyle alive. I closed the banking application and slid the phone securely back into my clutch. I washed my hands under the warm water, dried them carefully with a linen towel, and reapplied my dark red lipstick. I looked perfectly composed and utterly untouchable. I walked back out into the hallway and returned to the private dining room. When I sat back down, the atmosphere was still incredibly tense. My family was quietly eating, trying their best to ignore the blatant disrespect that had just occurred moments ago. Xavier was leaning over, showing Raven a funny video on his phone, acting as if everything in the world was perfectly normal. They truly believed they had put me in my place. They truly believed the money would just keep flowing endlessly, because I was too deeply invested in the public image of a perfect elite marriage to ever disrupt it. I picked up my silver fork and took a bite of the exquisite dinner I was paying for. The food tasted incredible. I looked at Xavier and smiled again. "Enjoy your meal, Xavier," I said softly. He smiled back arrogantly, entirely unaware that the financial guillotine had already dropped. The heavy blade was falling rapidly, and they would not feel the devastating impact until the morning. Let them sleep well tonight, because tomorrow they would wake up to the incredibly harsh reality of exactly who funded their very existence. They had bitten the hand that fed them, and now they would starve. I took another sip of my sparkling water, savoring the sweet taste of impending justice. The game was finally over and I had won. The morning sun was just beginning to cast a soft golden light over the sprawling manicured lawns of my Buckhead estate when the peace was finally broken. I had been awake since 5 o'clock, sitting quietly at the massive quartz island in my expansive kitchen, enjoying the perfect uninterrupted silence. The imported Italian espresso machine hummed softly as it brewed my morning cup. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows wearing a simple silk robe, feeling more rested and clear-headed than I had in over 14 months. The toxic fog that had clouded my judgment for so long was completely gone, replaced by a sharp and unforgiving clarity. I took a slow sip of the rich, dark coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I was waiting for it with the patient anticipation of a hunter watching a trap snap shut. At exactly 6 in the morning, the absolute silence of the mansion was violently shattered by a high-pitched, hysterical scream. It came from the front courtyard, echoing loudly through the grand marble foyer. I did not flinch. I did not rush out to see what was wrong. I simply took another calm sip of my espresso and watched through the tinted glass as the carefully constructed illusion of wealth collapsed right in my own driveway. Raven was standing barefoot on the cold paving stones, wearing nothing but an oversized designer sleep shirt. She was waving her arms frantically and screaming at a burly man in a neon yellow safety vest. Behind the man, a massive industrial tow truck was currently backing up toward her precious custom white Mercedes G-Wagon. The heavy steel chains clanked loudly in the quiet morning air, a harsh industrial sound that signaled the abrupt end of her elite socialite masquerade. She tried to open the driver's side door, but the repossession agent had already secured the vehicle. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded down the sweeping marble staircase. Xavier burst into the kitchen, his face twisted in absolute panic. He had barely managed to throw on his expensive silk robe, and his usually perfectly groomed hair was a messy disaster. He looked nothing like the polished, arrogant businessman who had humiliated me at the country club just 12 hours earlier. "Cecilia," he yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "There are men outside taking Raven's car. You need to call the bank right now. There must be some kind of massive clerical error. They are hooking up the chains. Call them and fix this immediately." I did not move from my spot by the window. I slowly turned my head to look at him, my expression completely blank and devoid of any sympathy. I took another leisurely sip of my espresso, feeling the caffeine course through my veins. "There is no clerical error, Xavier," I said, my voice soft and perfectly level. "I canceled the lease agreement early this morning. I authorized the early termination penalty and initiated the repossession order myself." Xavier froze. The color drained completely from his face as his brain struggled to process the words I had just spoken. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to find a way to reassert his dominance. He took a step toward me, his posture aggressive, but I did not back away. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his tone dropping into a dangerous growl. "You cannot just cancel the lease on her car. She needs that vehicle for school. You need to go out there and tell those men to unhook her car right now." I set my espresso cup down on the quartz counter with a soft, deliberate click. I looked him dead in the eyes, mirroring the exact same cold, arrogant expression he had given me the night before. "She is not my daughter, Xavier," I said, repeating his exact words with terrifying precision. "Remember, you made it very clear in front of my entire family that I do not have the right to correct her or parent her. And you were absolutely right. So as a woman with no relation to her, I have no legal or moral obligation to provide her with a luxury vehicle. I suggest you go out there and buy her a car with your own money since you are her father." Before Xavier could formulate a response, the heavy oak front door slammed open and Raven burst into the house. She was hyperventilating, her face streaked with tears and running makeup. She ignored her father completely and marched straight into the kitchen, waving her smartphone frantically in the air. "My phone is glitching," she screamed, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I tried to order my coffee on the Starbucks app, and my Apple Pay declined. It said the account was closed. And then I got an email from the bursar office at Spelman. Raven stopped to catch her breath, her chest heaving as panic completely consumed her. She looked down at her screen, her hands shaking violently. "They sent an automated purge notification." She sobbed, her voice rising in pitch. "The email says my classes have been officially dropped because of an unpaid balance of $28,000. Rush week starts in 3 days. If I am not enrolled in classes, I cannot participate in any of the events. My entire social life will be ruined. You have to fix this right now. Pay the tuition." I looked at the spoiled 19-year-old girl who had called my parents ghetto just last night. She was now begging the very same woman she had completely disrespected, relying on my wealth to maintain her prestigious status at one of the most elite, historically black colleges in the country. Spelman was an institution built on the excellence and hard work of black women, and Raven had treated her attendance there like a country club membership funded by my tireless labor. "I am sorry, Raven," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "I cannot help you. I permanently canceled the black card because you are no longer an authorized user on my accounts. And as for your tuition, I deleted the scheduled transfer. You will have to ask your father to cover your educational expenses from now on." Raven stared at me, her jaw dropping in absolute horror. She looked over at Xavier, expecting him to step up and act like the wealthy, powerful man he always claimed to be. But Xavier was completely silent. He knew he did not have $28,000. He knew he did not even have the credit score to co-sign a student loan for her. His entire identity was a hollow shell built entirely around my bank accounts. "Dad," Raven cried out, turning to him desperately. "Do something. Pay the bill so I can get my classes back. I cannot be purged. Everyone will know I am broke." Xavier swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down the side of his face. He turned back to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and furious rage. He realized that the dynamic had shifted permanently. He could no longer command me, so he immediately resorted to the only weapon he had left, which was emotional manipulation. "Cecilia, you are taking this way too far," he said, trying to lower his voice to sound reasonable and calm. "I know you are upset about last night. I admit I was harsh, and I should not have spoken to you that way in front of your parents. But you cannot punish a young black girl by taking away her education and her transportation. We are supposed to be building an empire together. We are supposed to be a shining example of black love and generational wealth. You are trying to tear down a black man and his family over a petty argument." The absolute audacity of his speech was staggering. He was trying to weaponize our race and our culture to guilt-trip me into continuing to fund his parasitic lifestyle. He was using the beautiful concept of building an empire to mask the fact that he was simply stealing from mine. "Generational wealth, Xavier?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You cannot build generational wealth when you are spending money that does not belong to you. You are not building an empire. You are squatting in mine. And black love requires mutual respect and honesty, neither of which you have ever shown me. You sat at my table, drank my liquor, and humiliated me in front of the people who gave me life. You thought my silence was submission. You thought I was too weak to walk away from a fake marriage? You were completely wrong." Xavier stepped closer, his face contorting into an ugly mask of pure aggression. "You listen to me, you bitter woman," he spat, his voice echoing in the large kitchen. "You are my wife. What is yours is mine. You cannot just cut me off. I am entitled to half of everything you have. I will drag you through the courts and take half of that startup money you have been hoarding. You are going to fix these accounts right now, or I promise you I will make your life a living nightmare." I did not flinch at his threats. I had anticipated his anger, and I was fully prepared for it. I reached into the deep pocket of my silk robe and pulled out a crisp white envelope. I held it out toward him, my hand completely steady. Xavier stared at the envelope, suspiciously refusing to take it. "What is that?" he demanded. "It is a formal 30-day eviction notice," I said calmly, dropping the envelope onto the court's counter right in front of him. "I had my security firm deliver it early this morning. The deed to this mansion is strictly in my name and owned by my corporate holding company. You have absolutely no equity in this property. By law, I have to give you 30 days to vacate the premises, but I strongly suggest you and your daughter start packing your bags immediately." Raven let out a loud wail, sinking to the kitchen floor and burying her face in her hands. She was mourning the loss of her luxury vehicle, her elite college status, and the glamorous life she had taken for granted. Xavier stared at the envelope on the counter as if it were a venomous snake. His entire chest was heaving with heavy, ragged breaths. "You cannot do this to us," he whispered, his voice shaking with a potent mix of disbelief and fury. "We have nowhere to go. My consulting business is waiting on payments. I do not have the liquid cash to secure a new lease right now." "Then you better start calling your clients," I said, turning my back on him to look out the window again. The tow truck was just pulling out of the driveway, taking the white Mercedes away forever. "Or perhaps you can call Vanessa and ask her if you can sleep on her couch." I casually dropped the name of his supposedly evil ex-wife, knowing full well the secret connection he still had with her. I knew the devastating information my brother-in-law Liam was bringing to me later today, but I wanted to plant the seed of panic in Xavier's mind right now. Xavier gasped softly, a tiny sound that confirmed he knew exactly what I was implying. He realized in that solitary moment that I was not just reacting emotionally to a dinner party insult. I was executing a highly calculated, systematic dismantling of his entire life. He was entirely at my mercy, and I had none left to give. I took one final sip of my espresso, letting the silence stretch out between us. The house that had once felt like a prison of expectations now felt entirely like my own domain again. I had severed the financial ties and set the boundaries. The eviction notice was served and the countdown had officially begun. The real war was about to start, and as I stood in my beautiful kitchen, watching the sun fully rise over Atlanta, I knew without a doubt that I was ready to burn his fake empire to the ground. The heavy oak doors of my home office closed with a solid, reassuring thud, shutting out the chaotic sounds of Xavier and Raven pacing frantically in the hallway. I walked over to my massive mahogany desk and sat down in my leather executive chair. The morning was barely over, but the war had already begun. My smartphone sat on the polished surface of the desk, and it was currently lighting up like a frantic beacon. The screen displayed an endless stream of incoming calls and text messages. Xavier had clearly retreated to his guest bedroom and started making desperate phone calls to his family. He was a masterful manipulator who knew exactly how to twist a narrative to make himself the ultimate victim. Within minutes, he had completely rallied his enablers and mobilized his personal army against me. The first voicemail was from his mother. I pressed play and let the audio fill the quiet room. Her voice was sharp and thick with absolute venom. She did not bother with any polite greetings. She launched right into a vicious tirade, calling me a bitter, barren step-monster. She accused me of using my wealth to systematically oppress a young, innocent black girl who was just trying to get an education. She screamed into the phone that I was a disgrace to my community and that I would answer to God for kicking a black man and his child out onto the streets. The voicemails from his aunts followed the exact same toxic pattern. They called me selfish and cold-hearted, claiming that my lack of biological children had made me completely incapable of understanding true family bonds. I listened to every single word with utter detachment. I felt absolutely no sadness or guilt. I only felt a deep, profound validation. These were the very same women who had happily accepted the first-class plane tickets and luxury hotel suites I had paid for when we got married. These were the women who smiled in my face and drank my expensive champagne while secretly harboring deep-seated resentment toward my success. Xavier was weaponizing their cultural expectations and their religious guilt to break my resolve. He expected the overwhelming pressure from the community elders to force me into submission. He wanted me to feel so ashamed and so isolated that I would turn the credit cards back on and apologize for overreacting. He vastly underestimated the protective armor I had built around my heart. I deleted the voicemails one by one. I blocked their phone numbers with smooth, precise movements of my fingers. I refused to absorb their manufactured outrage. Outside my office door, Xavier began knocking loudly. His voice was muffled through the thick wood, but I could hear the aggressive edge returning to his tone. He demanded that I open the door and speak to his mother on the phone. He shouted that I was destroying our family reputation and that the entire church community would hear about my cruel behavior by Sunday service. I simply reached over and turned on a small desk fan to drown out his pathetic noise. I had zero interest in debating with a man whose entire existence was currently circling the drain of my canceled bank accounts. The standoff lasted for nearly an hour before the sound of the front doorbell echoed through the mansion. I watched the live feed from my security cameras on my desktop monitor. A sleek black luxury sedan had pulled up the driveway. Liam stepped out of the vehicle carrying a thick manila folder under his arm. Liam was my sister, Monique's husband, and one of the most ruthless trust and estate attorneys in the entire state of Georgia. He was a tall, imposing white man who moved with the calm, calculated precision of a predator who never missed his mark. I had authorized his entry at the security gate earlier that morning, knowing he would bring the final pieces of the puzzle I needed to completely destroy Xavier. The security cameras showed Liam walking through the grand foyer. Xavier rushed up to him immediately, trying to block his path. Xavier was gesturing wildly, pointing toward my office, and clearly trying to spin his false narrative. He was probably hoping to get Liam on his side, or at least stall the inevitable. But Liam did not even break his stride. He looked at Xavier with eyes so cold and devoid of respect that Xavier actually took a step backward. Liam bypassed the shouting man entirely and walked straight down the hallway toward my office. I pressed the remote release button under my desk, and the heavy oak doors swung open just as Liam reached them. Liam stepped inside and pushed the doors firmly shut behind him. He reached over and turned the heavy brass lock, securing us inside and completely blocking Xavier out. The sudden silence in the room was a welcome relief. Liam did not offer any small talk or pleasantries. He knew exactly what kind of day I was having, and he was all business. He walked over to the two leather chairs facing my desk and took a seat. He placed the thick manila folder on the polished wood surface between us. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression deadpan, but his eyes conveyed a deep sense of professional solidarity. "You look entirely too calm for a woman whose house is currently falling apart," he noted, his voice even and composed. "The house is perfectly fine," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "It is just the trash taking itself out. Did you find what we were looking for, Liam?" Liam nodded slowly and rested his hands on the manila folder. He told me that after the dinner party last night, he went straight to his office and began running a comprehensive forensic audit on my authorized spending accounts. I had given him full legal access to monitor my trusts and my liquid assets years ago. He explained that his team worked through the night tracing every single transaction Xavier had made over the past 14 months. We both knew Xavier was spending excessively on luxury goods and status symbols, but what Liam uncovered went far deeper than designer suits and expensive dinners. "Xavier has been playing a much larger game than we anticipated," Liam said, opening the folder and extracting a stack of highlighted bank statements. "He has not just been using your money to fund his daughter's lifestyle. He has been systematically siphoning significant capital directly out of your secondary investment accounts." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "Show me the numbers," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Liam spread the documents out in a neat line. He pointed to a series of wire transfers that had occurred consistently on the 15th of every single month. "Xavier told you that his consulting firm needed bridge loans to secure international investment deals." Liam continued tracing the routing numbers with his pen. "You authorized those transfers believing they were legitimate business investments. But Xavier never invested that money into any consulting firm." "There is no consulting firm, Cecilia. The business license he showed you was completely fabricated." I stared at the highlighted numbers, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. The amounts were staggering. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. It added up to a massive fortune. "Where did the money go?" I asked. My eyes locked on the paper. Liam pulled another document from the folder. This one was a corporate registration form from the state database. He funneled exactly $600,000 of your money into a hidden shell limited liability company, Liam explained. The company was set up just 3 weeks before your wedding. He used a registered agent to mask the ownership, but my team pierced the corporate veil this morning. $600,000. The number hung in the air heavy and suffocating. Xavier had stolen over $500,000 right from under my nose while smiling at me across the dinner table and promising me forever. I felt my jaw clench as a new, darker wave of anger began to build in my chest. What did the shell company purchase, I asked, knowing that criminals like Xavier never just let cash sit idle in an account. They always bought assets. This is where it gets incredibly ugly, Cecilia, Liam said, his tone dropping to a serious, hushed level. He reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a certified property deed. He slid the heavy parchment paper across the mahogany desk until it rested right in front of my hands. The funds from the shell company were used to purchase a luxury penthouse in the most expensive high-rise building in Buckhead, Liam stated. It was an all-cash transaction designed to leave no mortgage trail. But because the funds originated from your accounts, we can legally attach a claim to the property. I looked down at the property deed. My eyes scanned the legal jargon until they hit the designated owner line. I expected to see Xavier S. name or perhaps another fake corporate entity, but the name printed clearly on the official document made my blood run absolutely ice cold. The owner of the penthouse is Vanessa, I read aloud, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Liam nodded, his expression grim. Yes, he confirmed. Vanessa, Xavier S.'s supposedly estranged ex-wife. The woman he claimed destroyed his life and left him bankrupt before he met you. I stared at the name on the paper, unable to look away. Vanessa was supposed to be completely out of the picture. Xavier had spun countless tragic stories about how she had cheated on him and ruined his credit score, forcing him to start over from scratch. He had used those stories to garner my sympathy and to justify why he needed my financial backing to rebuild his consulting empire. They never separated, Cecilia, Liam said, leaning forward and resting his arms on his knees. They have been running a massive long con on you from the very beginning. Xavier targeted you because of your tech company valuation. He played the perfect supportive partner to get access to your capital. And while you were busy working 18-hour days to sell your startup, he was secretly funneling your wealth directly to Vanessa to fund their ultimate dream life. They used you as their personal bank to secure a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was not just a case of a lazy husband taking advantage of a wealthy wife. It was a highly organized, predatory criminal conspiracy. Xavier and Vanessa had conspired together to bleed me dry. They had probably laughed about it in that very same luxury penthouse paid for with the money I had sacrificed my youth to earn. They thought I was a naive, foolish woman who was so desperate for love and a picture-perfect marriage that I would never bother to look at the ledgers. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a brief moment. I could still hear Xavier pacing in the hallway outside, shouting about black love and family loyalty. He was a spectacular actor, performing his role flawlessly while robbing me blind. He was furious about the car and the tuition because those were his immediate cover identities. But his true panic, the real terror I had seen in his eyes when I mentioned Vanessa's name in the kitchen, was because he knew the larger scam was on the verge of collapsing. I opened my eyes and looked at Liam. My heart was beating with a slow, steady rhythm. The anger had completely crystallized into something incredibly sharp and dangerous. They thought they could steal my money and live like royalty in my city, I said softly, picking up the property deed and tracing Vanessa's name with my manicured fingernail. They thought they could use my brilliance to fund their mediocre existence. Liam watched me closely. I have already drafted the civil litigation paperwork, he said. We can freeze all of his remaining accounts and place a lien on the penthouse by noon. The wire fraud alone carries significant federal prison time. We have them trapped, Cecilia. What do you want to do? I stood up from my desk and walked over to the large window, looking out at the beautiful estate I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I thought about the voicemails from his mother calling me a bitter stepmonster. I thought about Raven throwing tantrums in my driveway. And I thought about Xavier and Vanessa plotting my financial ruin while sleeping in a bed I paid for. I do not just want my money back, Liam, I said, turning to face my brother-in-law. I want to destroy them completely. I want to take the penthouse. I want to take the fake consulting firm. I want to ensure that Xavier and Vanessa are left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. I want them to feel the exact same terror and desperation they intended for me. Liam smiled, a predatory grin that perfectly matched my own. Consider it done, he said, standing up and closing the manila folder. I will unleash the hounds. I sat at my solid mahogany desk, staring blindly at the property deed that bore the name of my husband's supposedly estranged ex-wife. I was fully prepared to march straight down the wide hallway and confront Xavier with the undeniable proof of his massive financial fraud. I wanted to see the exact moment the confident color drained from his arrogant face when he realized I knew all about the $600,000 he had stolen to buy Vanessa a luxury penthouse in the city. But before I could even push my chair back and stand up, my smartphone began to vibrate violently across the polished wood surface of my desk. It was not another angry, unhinged voicemail from his enabling mother or a frantic, demanding text message from his judgmental aunts. The incoming notifications were coming directly from my corporate public relations team and my senior executive board members. My stomach tightened into a painful knot as I opened the first urgent email from my head of communications. The subject line simply read, "Urgent crisis management required immediately." I clicked the secure link attached to the email and was instantaneously redirected to a popular social media platform. Raven had not just been crying and throwing a massive temper tantrum out in the cold driveway. She had taken her theatrical performance to a massive global audience. She had posted a highly edited, heavily scripted video on social media playing the role of the ultimate victim flawlessly. In the viral video, she was sitting on the floor of her spacious bedroom, wearing an oversized faded hoodie, looking completely disheveled and sobbing uncontrollably into the camera lens. She claimed that her narcissistic, elitist tech billionaire stepmother had just maliciously kicked her out of college and left her entirely homeless over a minor petty household disagreement. She painted a vivid, horrifying picture of a cruel, wealthy woman who used her massive financial power to oppress and manipulate a young, innocent black college student who was just trying to get a quality education. She cried heavy crocodile tears about how she was going to be aggressively purged from Spelman College right before rush week and how her loving, devoted father was currently being thrown out onto the unforgiving street without a single penny to his name, all because I was a bitter, jealous woman. The short video was an absolute masterclass in modern digital manipulation. She deliberately used all the right social justice buzzwords to trigger immediate public outrage. She talked extensively about financial abuse, toxic elitism, the betrayal of Black love, and the specific cruelty of Black women tearing down other Black women. Within 2 short hours, the emotional video had amassed over 1 million views and was spreading like absolute wildfire across every single major social media platform. The thousands of comments pouring in were entirely one-sided, calling for my financial technology company to be totally boycotted and demanding that I be held publicly accountable for my supposed horrific cruelty. Raven had successfully weaponized the entire internet against me, portraying herself as the helpless, innocent casualty of an evil, wealthy stepmother who had lost touch with her community roots. The professional fallout from the video was instantaneous and absolutely brutal. My mobile phone did not stop ringing for a single second. My executive assistant rapidly forwarded frantic, nervous messages from our top-tier investors and prominent venture capital partners. In the highly scrutinized, competitive world of financial technology, public perception is literally everything. My personal and corporate brand was heavily built on empowering minority entrepreneurs, fostering deep financial literacy within our community, and lifting up young Black women. Raven had essentially dropped a public relations nuclear bomb directly onto my pristine, carefully cultivated reputation. Our key investors were incredibly nervous about the sudden negative attention. Several prominent board members called to gently ask if I needed to step down temporarily until the massive media firestorm could be effectively contained. They were terrified that the overwhelmingly negative press would severely impact our upcoming corporate acquisition deals and completely derail the upward momentum we had spent years painstakingly building. The reputational damage was spreading so rapidly that my lead public relations director advised me to issue an immediate groveling public apology and reinstate the expensive college tuition just to stop the catastrophic bleeding before the stock valuation took a permanent hit. As I sat there quietly watching my corporate reputation take a literal beating in the ruthless court of public opinion, the heavy oak doors of my home office swung wide open without a knock. Xavier walked right in. He was no longer the panicked, desperate man who had been screaming and sweating in the kitchen just a few hours ago. He had clearly seen the viral video online and realized he suddenly held a massive piece of social leverage over me. He walked over to my desk with a slow, arrogant swagger, buttoning his tailored designer suit jacket as if he had already won the entire war. He sat down heavily in the plush leather chair opposite me, crossing his legs comfortably and leaning back with total confidence. He looked directly at the multiple glowing screens on my desk, showing the crashing social media metrics, and smiled a cold, triumphant, nasty smile. "You look a little bit stressed out, Cecilia," he said, his deep voice dripping with heavy condescension and fake sympathy. "It seems my daughter has quite a powerful voice on the internet today. The general public does not seem to like how you treat your own family." I kept my face completely blank, giving him absolutely nothing to work with, masking the intense fury burning inside my chest. "What exactly do you want, Xavier?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on his knees, and dropping the facade of the loving, concerned husband entirely. He wanted me to restore all the canceled luxury credit cards immediately. He demanded that I pay the $28,000 Spelman College tuition in full by the end of the business day. And then he delivered his ultimate audacious ultimatum. He wanted me to legally sign over 20% of my entire financial technology company directly to him. He calmly claimed it was the only possible way he would ever force Raven to take down the viral video and issue a sincere public retraction to clear my name. He smiled smugly, showing his perfectly white teeth, telling me that giving up 20% of my company was a very small, reasonable price to pay to save my life. Work from being completely destroyed by the ruthless forces of modern cancel culture. He sat there in the expensive custom suit I had paid for, looking at me as if I were a frightened, cornered animal forced into an unconditional surrender. He honestly believed he had me completely trapped in a corner. He truly believed that the looming threat of public humiliation and corporate ruin would be more than enough to make me blindly hand over a massive portion of the empire I had built with my own two bare hands. As he arrogantly listed his ridiculous demands, the loud noise of the ringing phones and the chaotic incoming notifications seemed to fade away entirely from my awareness. My mind drifted far back to the very beginning of my difficult journey, long before the millions of dollars and the massive estate. I remembered the cold, harsh, bitter reality of being a young, ambitious Black woman trying desperately to break into the elite, wealthy, white male-dominated world of financial technology. I remembered the countless intimidating boardroom pitches where older men in expensive conservative suits would look at me with polite, patronizing amusement, completely dismissing my complex algorithms and my innovative business models before I even finished speaking my first sentence. I remembered the wealthy venture capitalists who explicitly asked to speak to my male co-founder, assuming I was merely the administrative assistant or a diversity hire for the project. I remembered the soul-crushing, profound exhaustion of working through the night, sleeping on the cold, hard floor of my first tiny leased office, fueled only by cheap, bitter coffee and sheer, absolute determination to prove every single one of them wrong. I had fought fiercely through unimaginable dense layers of systemic racial bias and blatant gender discrimination just to secure my initial seed funding to get my company off the ground. I had willingly risked my physical health, my mental sanity, and the best years of my youth to build a technology company that actually mattered and disrupted the industry. Every single line of secure code, every lucrative corporate partnership, every hard-earned dollar in my bank account was earned through relentless, unwavering grit and countless tears. I had bled for my profound success. I had sacrificed everything normal in my life for my ultimate financial independence. And now this mediocre parasitic con artist sitting across from me actually thought he could simply threaten me with a teenager dramatic social media video and easily steal 20% of my entire life work. He thought I would fold under the public pressure because he fundamentally misunderstood exactly who I was at my core. He thought I was just a wealthy, lonely, insecure woman who was desperate to protect her elite social standing and her fake marriage. He did not realize for a single second that the calm, quiet woman sitting across from him was a hardened, ruthless veteran of brutal corporate warfare. I did not build an $85 million enterprise by bowing to cheap extortion from a weak man. I looked at Xavier taking in his smug, overconfident posture and his greedy, calculating eyes. I knew all about the $600,000 he had quietly stolen from my accounts. I knew all about the luxury penthouse he had secretly bought for his supposedly estranged ex-wife Vanessa. I knew all about the entire criminal financial conspiracy they had meticulously plotted behind my back since the very day we met. And he had absolutely no idea that I knew everything. He was playing a simple game of checkers, while I was moving heavy pieces on a complex chessboard he could not even begin to see. My inner resolve hardened into pure, unbreakable solid steel. I was absolutely not going to let a common thief take a single piece of my hard-earned empire. I was going to let him believe he was winning the battle right up until the exact moment I destroyed him, completely and utterly. I took a slow, deep breath and intentionally forced my shoulders to slump slightly forward. I lowered my gaze, looking down at my hands resting on the desk, as if the heavy, crushing weight of the terrible situation had finally broken my spirit. I let a long, heavy, trembling sigh escape my lips perfectly, playing the role of the terrified, defeated wife who suddenly realized she had no other viable choice but to give in. "You win, Xavier?" I said, my voice soft and deliberately unsteady, projecting total submission. The public relations damage is spreading entirely too fast across the internet. If the major investors pull out of our deals now, everything I have worked so hard for will be completely ruined. I cannot afford to lose my company over this stupid scandal. I will agree to your terms and give you what you want. Xavier leaned back heavily in his plush leather chair, a massive, victorious, greedy grin spreading widely across his handsome face. He actually clapped his hands together, once a loud, sharp sound of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "I knew you would finally see reason, Cecilia," he said, his tone unbearably patronizing and slick. "It is simply the smart, logical business move for everyone involved. Once all the legal paperwork is properly signed and the bank accounts are fully active again, I will personally have Raven post a new update saying it was all just a big emotional misunderstanding. We can put this ugly little morning completely behind us and get back to building our beautiful lives together, just like we planned." I looked up at him, forcing my eyes to look tired, weary, and completely compliant. "How do you want to handle the corporate equity transfer?" I asked quietly, keeping my voice completely subdued. Xavier did not miss a single beat, showing how long he had been waiting for this exact moment. He told me he had already contacted his personal lawyer, an aggressive, high-priced divorce attorney known around Atlanta for being absolutely ruthless in high-net-worth negotiations. He wanted to schedule a formal legal mediation meeting for tomorrow morning to finalize the permanent transfer of the 20% equity and sign the updated financial banking agreements. He wanted it all done legally and bindingly on paper before he would call off the social media dogs and clear my name. I nodded slowly, acting as though I was accepting his harsh terms without any further argument or fight. "Set the meeting for 10 in the morning, I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tell your lawyer to have all the necessary paperwork ready to go. I will bring my representation and we will get this finalized so we can stop the bleeding before the market opens on Monday." Xavier stood up, smoothing his expensive silk tie, looking exactly like a man who had just conquered the entire world and secured his financial future forever. He told me he would text me the address of his lawyer's upscale office and walked confidently out of the room, leaving the heavy door wide open behind him. I sat completely still in the silence of my office, listening closely as his confident footsteps faded away down the long marble hallway. The very moment he was entirely gone, my posture straightened instantly and the fake defeated look vanished from my face, entirely replaced by a cold, predatory stare. I picked up my phone and dialed my brother-in-law, Liam. The trap was now perfectly set. Xavier thought he was walking into a cozy mediation room to effortlessly claim 20% of my massive company and restore his lavish, stolen lifestyle. He had absolutely no idea he was actually walking blindly into a brutal, legal slaughterhouse. I smiled a dark, genuine smile as Liam answered the phone on the first ring. "Prepare the trust documents, Liam," I said, my voice ringing with cold, lethal anticipation. He took the bait completely. It is time to show them exactly what happens when you try to extort the bank. The glass walls of the downtown Atlanta high-rise offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, but my attention was entirely focused on the long, polished mahogany conference table in front of me. We were seated in the expensive offices of Xavier and his chosen legal representation. His lawyer was a man known for his brutal and aggressive tactics in high-net-worth divorce cases. Xavier sat across from me wearing a custom-tailored gray suit that I had paid for just 3 weeks prior. He looked incredibly smug and completely relaxed. He leaned back in his plush leather chair with the arrogant posture of a man who believed he had already won the lottery. Beside me sat my brother-in-law, Liam. Liam wore a simple dark navy suit and sat in absolute perfect stillness. He did not fidget or look around the room. He just watched Xavier and the opposing legal counsel with the cold, calculating eyes of a predator waiting for the exact right moment to strike. I kept my posture deliberately slumped forward, letting my shoulders drop to project an image of total defeat and exhaustion. I wanted Xavier to truly believe that the intense public relations nightmare and the viral social media backlash had completely broken my spirit. I needed him to feel an overwhelming sense of false security so the impact of his failure would be absolute and completely devastating. The lawyer began the mediation meeting by aggressively sliding a massive stack of legal documents across the smooth wooden table. He did not bother with any polite introductions or professional pleasantries. He launched straight into a highly rehearsed speech about how much damage his client had suffered over the past 48 hours. The lawyer loudly proclaimed that my cruel and sudden financial abandonment had caused Xavier severe emotional distress and profound reputational damage in the local business community. He went on a long tangent about how a prominent black man in Atlanta relies heavily on his public image, and how my actions had irreparably harmed his ability to secure future consulting contracts. I listened quietly as the lawyer laid out their outrageous demands. They wanted the immediate restoration of all canceled credit cards. They wanted the full payment of the $28,000 college tuition by the end of the business day. They wanted the exclusive deed to my Buckhead mansion transferred entirely into Xavier and his name. And most importantly, they demanded exactly 50% of my entire $85 million net worth, along with an ongoing monthly spousal support payment of $40,000. Xavier could barely contain his massive, greedy smile as his lawyer read the absurd demands out loud. He leaned forward and rested his arms on the table, looking directly into my eyes. He told me in a low, patronizing voice that this was the only fair and equitable way to settle our differences without taking the messy dispute to an open public trial. He reminded me that the media firestorm was already severely hurting my corporate brand and that my prominent investors were getting extremely nervous. He said he was doing me a massive favor by offering to settle quietly behind closed doors. He explicitly brought up the fact that we did not have a prenuptial agreement. I remembered exactly how that had happened 14 months ago. I had brought up the idea of a standard prenuptial agreement to protect my business assets before our wedding. Xavier had immediately acted incredibly deeply offended. He had spent weeks emotionally manipulating me using elaborate speeches about trust and partnership. He had weaponized our shared cultural background, telling me that Black couples needed to build generational wealth together without the white corporate concept of defensive legal contracts poisoning their union. He had manufactured tears and told me that asking for a prenuptial agreement meant I was already planning for our beautiful black love to fail. He had made me feel so incredibly guilty for doubting his intentions that I eventually dropped the subject entirely and married him without any financial protection in place. Now sitting in this sterile conference room, Xavier was openly bragging about that exact manipulation. He told me that because we entered our marriage with pure unwritten trust, the state of Georgia legally viewed all my assets as joint marital property. His lawyer confidently chimed in, stating that since my company was sold for $85 million during the timeline of our legal marriage, Xavier was absolutely legally entitled to exactly half of that massive payout. The lawyer tapped his expensive gold pen against the thick stack of settlement papers and told me I needed to sign them immediately to stop the financial bleeding and save my public reputation from further destruction. I kept my eyes focused downward, playing the role of the defeated, overwhelmed wife for just a few more seconds. I let the silence stretch out in the room, allowing Xavier to bask in his fake victory. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit and the distant sound of city traffic far below us. Then I slowly lifted my head and looked at Liam. I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was now fully primed and ready to be sprung. Liam reached down into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a single slender manila envelope. He placed it gently on the table right next to the massive stack of aggressive demands the opposing lawyer had presented. The contrast between their chaotic mountain of paperwork and our single elegant envelope was striking. Liam looked directly at the opposing lawyer and spoke for the very first time since we had entered the room. His voice was incredibly calm, perfectly modulated, and completely devoid of any emotion. He told the opposing counsel that they had fundamentally misunderstood the entire financial structure of my estate. Xavier frowned deeply, his arrogant smile faltering just a fraction of an inch. He asked Liam what he was talking about, demanding that we stop wasting time and sign the papers. Liam ignored Xavier completely, keeping his sharp blue eyes locked entirely on the other attorney. Liam explained that while it was completely true that I and Xavier did not sign a standard prenuptial agreement before our wedding, that fact was entirely legally irrelevant to the current division of assets. The opposing lawyer scoffed loudly and asked Liam to explain how a lack of a prenuptial agreement could possibly be irrelevant when dealing with an $85 million marital estate. Liam calmly reached out and opened the manila envelope. He slid a crisp, legally notarized document across the polished mahogany table. He told the lawyer to read the first 3 pages very carefully. It was an irrevocable blind trust document. Liam explained in his smooth professional tone that exactly 6 months before Xavier and I had even met at that charity gala, he had completely restructured my entire financial portfolio. As a top-tier trust and estate attorney, Liam had strongly advised his sister-in-law to protect her rapidly growing tech company from any future personal liability. He knew that young, wealthy black women were prime targets for financial predators, and he made sure my wealth was locked away in a fortress of legal documentation. Liam detailed how he had helped me legally transfer 100% of my corporate shares, my intellectual property, my real estate holdings, and my liquid capital directly into an irrevocable blind trust. He explained the strict legal definition of this specific financial vehicle to the room. Once the assets were placed inside the irrevocable trust, they legally ceased to belong to me as an individual private citizen. I was merely a designated beneficiary of the trust, which was managed by an independent third-party financial board that Liam oversaw. Because the trust was irrevocable, it could not be modified, amended, or dissolved by me or anyone else under any circumstances. The opposing lawyer picked up the document and began to read rapidly, his eyes darting back and forth across the dense legal text. I watched as all the color slowly drained from his face. The aggressive, confident posture he had held just moments ago completely evaporated. He realized instantly that he had walked his client into a massive, unwinnable legal brick wall. Liam continued his explanation with ruthless surgical precision. He stated clearly that since I did not legally own any of the $85 million when I married Xavier, there was absolutely zero marital property to divide. My personal net worth on paper was effectively zero. The Buckhead mansion was owned by the trust. The luxury vehicles were leased by the trust. The bank accounts were managed by the trust. Xavier looked back and forth between Liam and his own lawyer, his face twisting in sudden confusion and rising panic. He demanded to know what was going on and why his lawyer was suddenly completely silent. He slammed his hand on the table and yelled that I had just sold my company for $85 million, so the money had to exist somewhere. He insisted that he had seen the deposit records with his own two eyes and knew the capital was sitting in an account waiting to be divided. His lawyer finally looked up from the documents and placed his pen down on the table. He looked at Xavier with a mixture of professional embarrassment and deep frustration. The lawyer quietly explained to Xavier that the money did exist, but it was completely legally untouchable. Because the assets were placed into an irrevocable trust prior to the marriage, they were entirely shielded from any divorce proceedings or spousal support claims. Xavier went absolutely ballistic. He jumped up from his leather chair, knocking it backward onto the floor with a loud crash. He leaned over the conference table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. He screamed that I had lied to him and completely deceived him from the very beginning. He yelled that I was a manipulative, cold-hearted snake who had deliberately planned to leave him with nothing. The absolute irony of his accusations was almost laughable. The man who had secretly stolen $600,000 to buy his supposedly estranged ex-wife a luxury penthouse was now screaming about deception and betrayal because he could not steal the rest of my fortune. I remained perfectly seated, my posture completely relaxed and unaffected by his violent outburst. I looked up at him, my face a calm, smooth mask of pure, unbothered tranquility. I told him that I had never lied to him about anything. I simply protected my life work from financial predators who try to use fake romance and cultural guilt to secure a payday they never earned. I reminded him that he was the one who had so passionately insisted we did not need any defensive legal contracts because our love was supposedly built on pure trust. I told him I had simply trusted my white brother-in-law to handle my corporate structuring while I focused on being a good, supportive wife to a man who ended up being a complete parasitic fraud. Xavier was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with uncontrolled rage. He threatened to take the story to the press and tell the whole world how I had hidden my wealth and scammed a hard-working black man out of his rightful equity. He promised that the social media backlash his daughter had started was absolutely nothing compared to the media firestorm he was going to unleash on my company if I did not find a way to pay him out immediately. He demanded a massive cash settlement just to walk away quietly and sign the divorce papers without completely destroying my corporate reputation. His lawyer gently tried to pull Xavier back and advise him to calm down, recognizing that making extortion threats in front of opposing counsel was a terrible legal strategy. But Xavier shoved his lawyer away, completely lost in his own greedy, desperate fury. I watched his pathetic display for another moment before I finally decided it was time to end the meeting entirely. I stood up slowly, smoothing out the front of my tailored suit skirt. I looked at Xavier and let a very slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. I told him that he was deeply confused about the current state of our relationship and the reality of his situation. I explained that for the past 14 months, I had been playing defense, trying to protect my peace and maintain a happy household, while he slowly bled me dry. I told him that phase of my life was officially over. I picked up my designer handbag and looked directly into his panicked, furious eyes. I informed him that I was no longer interested in defending my assets from his greedy hands because they were already perfectly safe behind a wall of impenetrable legal protection. I told him that starting right now, I was transitioning entirely to the offensive. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the mahogany table, closing the distance between us. I whispered softly so only he and his lawyer could hear the absolute venom in my voice. I told him I knew all about the fraudulent shell company he had created behind my back, using my hard-earned wealth. I told him I knew exactly where my missing $600,000 had gone down to the very last cent. And I told him I knew all about the luxury penthouse in downtown Atlanta, where Vanessa was currently living very comfortably on my stolen dime, playing the role of the wealthy ex-wife. Xavier froze instantly. All the aggressive, blustering air was violently knocked out of his lungs in a single second. The realization that I knew about his massive criminal conspiracy hit him with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror as he finally understood the true depth of the danger he was actually in. I turned to walk away, leaving him standing there completely paralyzed by immense fear. I looked over my shoulder one last time as Liam gathered his single manila envelope. I told Xavier he should probably call his ex-wife and let her know that she needed to start packing her bags because the real owner of her penthouse was coming to collect the debt immediately. The long walk out of that downtown Atlanta high-rise felt entirely different from the walk in. I slowly stepped into the private elevator alongside Liam, and the heavy metal doors slid shut, cutting off the frantic shouts of Xavier and his utterly humiliated attorney. The sheer panic in Xavier's voice was a glorious sound, but I knew it was only the beginning of his absolute downfall. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for him or the situation he now found himself in. He had spent well over a full year manipulating my emotions, isolating me from my parents, and draining my hard-earned wealth to fund a secret life with another woman. Now he was trapped in a financial nightmare of his own making, and I was the one holding the keys to every single exit. As we descended to the lobby, Liam looked over at me with a quiet nod of approval. We had just executed the perfect legal ambush, but we both knew the real war was far from over. Xavier was a desperate man cornered by his own lies, and desperate men always try to find a way to strike back. But I was not going to give him the time or the oxygen to formulate a counterattack. I told Liam that I wanted to move forward with the next phase of our strategy immediately. I wanted to completely suffocate Xavier financially, leaving him with absolutely no resources, no credit, and no place to hide. Liam smiled a cold professional smile and told me he had already drafted the necessary paperwork for my corporate acquisition team to begin executing the complex financial maneuvers. We stepped out into the warm Georgia sun, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally breathing clean air. I got into the back of my waiting town car and opened my laptop. The drive back to my corporate headquarters gave me exactly 30 minutes to set the next trap. I opened my encrypted communication channels and sent an urgent message to the senior analysts at my holding company. I told them to completely dissect the financial history of Xavier's fake consulting firm. I wanted to know every single entity he owed money to, every predatory loan he had signed, and every secret debt he had been hiding behind his tailored suits and expensive watches. When I arrived at my secure office building, my executive team was already waiting for me in the main boardroom. They knew about the viral social media video Raven had posted, and they were initially incredibly anxious about the public relations fallout. I held up my hand to silence their worried murmurs as I walked to the head of the long glass table. I told them in a calm, commanding voice that the media narrative was fully under control and that they needed to focus their undivided attention on a new, highly classified acquisition target. I projected the meager financial footprint of Xavier's fake business onto the large digital screen at the front of the room. My brilliant team of analysts had already managed to pull his business credit reports and public legal filings from multiple obscure state databases. The results were absolutely pathetic and entirely predictable given his complete lack of any real business acumen. Before Xavier had ever met me, his consulting firm was essentially a worthless, empty shell drowning in toxic, high-interest commercial debt. He had taken out multiple predatory loans from aggressive alternative lenders, just to keep up the convincing illusion of being a successful Black entrepreneur. He used those loans to lease expensive office space he never used and to rent luxury vehicles to impress wealthy women like me. Once we got married, he had been using my stolen money to make the minimum monthly payments on those massive toxic loans just to keep the aggressive creditors away from his door. But since I had completely severed his access to my bank accounts early this morning, he was now poised to default on every single one of those commercial agreements. He had absolutely zero liquidity left. I looked around the room at my financial experts and gave them a very simple, direct order. I told them I wanted to buy all of his outstanding debt. My lead analyst looked slightly confused for a brief moment. She finally asked me why I would ever want to acquire such toxic, worthless commercial paper. I smiled a very slow, calculating smile. I explained to her that when you buy a man's debt, you effectively own the man. I instructed my team to use a quiet, anonymous subsidiary company under my corporate umbrella to approach his various alternative lenders. I told them to immediately offer those aggressive creditors a premium cash buyout for the exclusive right to hold the promissory notes on Xavier's business. Those predatory lenders were notoriously eager to offload high-risk accounts, especially when a lucrative cash offer was placed directly on the table. Within just a few hours, my corporate subsidiary had successfully purchased every single dollar of debt Xavier owed in the world. I was now his sole creditor and the absolute master of his financial universe. Every fake business asset he claimed to own, every office lease agreement, every piece of leased luxury furniture in his fake corporate workspace was now completely legally bound to me. If he missed a single payment by even 1 hour, I had the absolute legal authority to seize everything he possessed and destroy his credit score permanently. But I was not finished yet. My ultimate target was not just Xavier. I wanted to completely dismantle the comfortable, luxurious life he had built for his partner in crime. I picked up my office phone and dialed Liam's private number. Liam answered immediately, his tone sharp and ready for action. I told him that my subsidiary had successfully acquired all of Xavier's commercial paper, and that it was now time to execute the final maneuver regarding the luxury penthouse in Buckhead. Liam had already filed a massive civil litigation lawsuit against the property, claiming that the $600,000 used for the down payment was stolen directly from my accounts through wire fraud. That aggressive legal action had effectively frozen Vanessa's ability to sell or leverage the property. But I wanted to go much further than just freezing her assets. I wanted to literally own the roof over her head. Liam explained that Vanessa had taken out a secondary private mortgage to cover the remaining balance on the expensive penthouse. Because her own credit was terrible, she had used a high-risk private lending group that specialized in wealthy clients with poor financial histories. I told Liam to contact that exact lending group on behalf of my holding company. I authorized him to offer them a massive cash incentive to buy out Vanessa's mortgage note entirely. The private lending group hesitated at first, but Liam is a master negotiator. He very quietly informed their legal counsel about the pending federal wire fraud investigation surrounding the initial down payment of the penthouse. He heavily implied that if the property was seized by the federal government, the private lenders might lose their entire investment in the ensuing legal chaos. He offered them a clean, immediate cash exit from a highly toxic situation. Greed and fear are powerful motivators in the financial sector. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the private lending group signed over the mortgage note completely. I sat at my desk and looked at the digital confirmation on my screen. I now legally owned the massive debt on Xavier's fake business, and I held the exclusive mortgage note on Vanessa's luxury penthouse. They had tried to use me as their personal bank to fund their dreams. Now I was quite literally the bank that was going to foreclose on their entire existence. I spent the rest of the evening preparing the necessary legal notices. I instructed my legal department to draft immediate notices of default and acceleration for all of Xavier's newly acquired commercial loans. Since he had already missed a technical reporting deadline hidden deep in the fine print of his original loan agreements, I had the legal right to demand the full repayment of the entire loan balance immediately. There would be no grace period and no negotiations whatsoever. As for Vanessa, her situation was even more precarious and legally compromised. The civil litigation Liam filed regarding the stolen funds constituted a material breach of her mortgage contract. I drafted a formal notice of foreclosure for the Buckhead penthouse. I wanted the documents hand-delivered by my private security team, The sheer power of having unlimited financial resources was intoxicating. I had transformed my deep personal betrayal into a cold, calculated corporate acquisition. I did not have to scream or cry or fight in the mud with these parasites. I simply used my brilliant mind and my overwhelming capital to completely rewrite the rules of their reality. The next morning, the quiet peace of my secure office building was violently disrupted. I was reviewing the latest user engagement metrics for my software platform when my desk phone buzzed. My executive assistant informed me in a very tense voice that a woman was demanding to see me down in the lobby. She said the woman was causing a massive scene, screaming profanities and refusing to leave until she spoke to me directly. I knew exactly who it was. I told my assistant to have security escort the woman up to my private floor immediately without any further delay or hesitation. I wanted to see the absolute panic in her eyes up close and personal. A few minutes later, the heavy glass doors to my executive suite flew open. Vanessa stormed into my office, looking absolutely nothing like the sweet, helpless, estranged ex-wife Xavier had always described. She was wearing a tight designer dress paid for with my money and carrying a Birkin bag funded by my hard work. Her face was twisted in a mask of pure, unhinged rage. Two of my large security guards stood closely behind her, ready to intervene the second she crossed a physical line. Vanessa slammed her manicured hands down on my desk, leaning over to glare at me. She screamed that I was a psychotic, bitter woman who was trying to destroy her innocent life. She yelled that I had no right to freeze her bank accounts or buy her mortgage. She completely dropped her innocent act and explicitly threatened to have Xavier drag my name through the mud on every local news station in Atlanta. She demanded that I release the lien on her penthouse immediately, or she would make sure I regretted it for the rest of my miserable life. I sat perfectly still in my chair, letting her scream until she ran completely out of breath. I looked at her shaking, angry face and felt absolutely nothing but cold amusement. I reached out and pressed a single silver button on my desk. I looked at the security guards and gave them a slight nod. The guards stepped forward and grabbed Vanessa firmly by the arms, pulling her away from my desk with professional, silent, brutal efficiency. She thrashed and screamed, threatening physical violence as they dragged her toward the door. I picked up a crisp white envelope from my desk and stood up. I walked over to Vanessa and tucked the envelope securely into the front pocket of her expensive, highly coveted designer purse. "You wanted to live on my dime." "Vanessa," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the large room. "Now you live on my property," I whispered. "And your rent is incredibly past due. You have exactly 3 days to pack up your stolen life and vacate the premises before I order the local sheriff to throw your belongings into the street." The heavy glass doors swung shut behind Vanessa, leaving a profound silence in my executive office. The threat of a looming eviction had completely shattered her arrogant facade. I knew that she would immediately run straight back to Xavier in an absolute panic. They were now two desperate animals backed into an inescapable financial corner. When parasites are completely trapped, they inevitably lash out with everything they have left. I fully expected Xavier to try one final aggressive maneuver to save his rapidly sinking ship. He did not disappoint me. Less than 48 hours after Vanessa was forcefully escorted out of my building, my legal team received a massive stack of official court filings. Xavier had managed to find a sleazy contingency lawyer willing to file a desperate civil lawsuit against me. The ridiculous legal documents accused me of severe financial abuse and fraudulent concealment. Xavier formally alleged that I had deliberately hidden the existence of my irrevocable blind trust to maliciously defraud him of his rightful marital assets. He filed for an emergency injunction demanding that the court immediately unfreeze the $600,000 and halt the foreclosure on Vanessa's luxury penthouse until the divorce was completely finalized. His lawsuit claimed that he was a victim of a wealthy, powerful woman who used her vast resources to oppress a hard-working black man. He was trying to build a public narrative of victimization, hoping to weaponize the legal system to force a quick settlement. Liam reviewed the desperate lawsuit with a cold, dismissive smirk. He told me that the entire filing was a pathetic legal Hail Mary, based entirely on fabricated emotional distress rather than actual corporate law. But Liam saw a brilliant opportunity hidden within their aggressive legal maneuver. By filing this specific civil lawsuit, Xavier had unknowingly opened the door for us to demand an immediate sworn deposition. Liam explained that we could force both Xavier and Vanessa to sit in a room and testify under absolute oath about their financial history before a judge ever even looked at their ridiculous injunction request. I gave Liam the absolute green light to schedule the deposition immediately. I wanted to trap them in their own web of lies on the official legal record. I spent the entire weekend working closely with my corporate security team to finalize the ultimate weapon we would use to completely annihilate them. We meticulously organized every single piece of digital evidence, formatting it into a devastating timeline of their massive criminal conspiracy. I wanted to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, there would be absolutely no room for negotiation or escape. I was ready to completely destroy the man who had tried to steal my empire. The deposition was scheduled for the following Tuesday morning in the massive primary conference room of Liam's prestigious law firm. The room was designed to completely intimidate anyone who walked through the doors. It featured floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, heavy leather furniture, and a sweeping panoramic view of the bustling Atlanta skyline. I arrived early and sat quietly beside Liam at the long, polished wooden table. A certified court reporter sat at the far end of the table, setting up her transcription machine to record every single word that was about to be spoken. Xavier and Vanessa arrived together looking incredibly nervous, but trying desperately to project an image of righteous indignation. Xavier's new contingency lawyer, a sweaty, nervous-looking man, sat beside them and began aggressively organizing his messy legal pads. Xavier glared at me with absolute pure hatred, but I simply stared back at him with the cold, detached expression of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into a lethal trap. Vanessa refused to even look in my direction, keeping her eyes firmly fixed on the table in front of her. They truly believed they could lie their way out of this massive disaster. Liam initiated the formal legal proceedings with ruthless surgical precision. His voice was perfectly modulated, projecting absolute authority and zero empathy. He started by questioning Xavier about the massive $600,000 wire transfer that had been quietly routed from my secondary investment accounts into the anonymous shell company. Liam asked Xavier to explicitly state the exact purpose of those substantial corporate funds. Xavier leaned forward into the microphone and confidently swore under oath that the money was a legitimate business loan. He claimed he had secured the capital to expand his elite investment consulting firm and negotiate lucrative international trade agreements. He explicitly denied any personal relationship with the anonymous shell company that received the massive cash infusion. He claimed the shell company was a foreign investment group looking to partner with him on future real estate developments. He sat back in his chair looking incredibly proud of his fabricated corporate narrative. He honestly believed he sounded like a brilliant, sophisticated businessman. Liam then turned his freezing cold attention directly to Vanessa. He asked her to formally state her exact relationship to the anonymous limited liability company that had purchased the luxury Buckhead penthouse. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her expensive leather chair but maintained the coordinated lie perfectly. She swore under absolute oath that she was merely an independent real estate investor who had legitimately secured a private commercial loan from an overseas investment group. She flatly denied ever receiving any stolen marital funds from Xavier. She explicitly testified that she and Xavier had maintained absolutely zero financial or personal contact since their divorce was finalized over 4 years ago. She claimed that any connection between her penthouse and his consulting firm was purely a massive coincidental misunderstanding. They had both just committed deliberate massive perjury on the official legal record. They truly believed they had successfully outsmarted the system by hiding behind anonymous corporate paperwork. They thought their lies were completely bulletproof. Liam let the heavy silence stretch out in the large room for a very long moment. He looked over at me, and I gave him a single subtle nod. It was finally time to drop the absolute nuclear bomb we had been carefully holding onto for the past 5 days. Liam reached down into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out a massive bound stack of printed documents. He slid the heavy stack across the mahogany table until it rested right in front of Xavier's nervous, sweaty attorney. The lawyer picked up the top page and began reading. Within 10 seconds, the color completely drained from his face and his hands began to visibly shake. Xavier demanded to know what the documents were, but his lawyer was completely speechless, staring at the pages in absolute pure horror. The lawyer looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on top of an active landmine. Liam leaned forward and calmly explained exactly what the opposing counsel was reading. He informed the room that when Xavier moved into my secure estate 14 months ago, I had graciously added his personal smartphone and his custom laptop to my corporate technology enterprise plan. Because those specific electronic devices were officially registered and fully paid for by my corporate holding company, they were legally considered my exclusive corporate property. Liam explained that as the sole owner of the corporate technology infrastructure, I had the absolute legal right to access, monitor, and download every single piece of data transmitted across my secure corporate network. I did not need a subpoena or a warrant to access my own corporate servers. Xavier had carelessly linked his personal communication applications directly to the mobile device I completely owned and controlled. The thick stack of paper resting on the table contained hundreds of pages of highly encrypted chat logs, text messages, and private emails directly between Xavier and Vanessa. My elite corporate security team had easily decrypted the hidden communication applications Xavier thought were completely secure. Liam began reading the highlighted transcripts out loud for the official court record. The messages were absolutely devastating. They detailed the entire criminal conspiracy step by step from the very beginning. There were text messages from Vanessa instructing Xavier on exactly how to manipulate my emotions during our initial courtship. There were detailed emails outlining the exact timeline for setting up the anonymous shell company to hide the stolen $600,000. There were explicit audio transcriptions of Xavier laughing about how easy it was to drain my secondary accounts while I was exhausted from working long hours at my technology startup. They had documented their entire massive fraud. The most damning piece of evidence was a long text exchange sent just 3 days before our extravagant wedding. In the messages, Xavier explicitly promised Vanessa that he would secure the luxury penthouse for her within the first 12 months of the marriage. Vanessa replied with a message instructing him to refuse any prenuptial agreement so they could eventually force a massive divorce settlement and split my entire net worth. The digital evidence was completely irrefutable. It proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that they had meticulously planned to commit massive wire fraud and grand larceny. Their entire testimony from just 5 minutes ago was a complete, verifiable lie. They had just committed federal perjury in front of a certified court reporter. The evidence painted a crystal-clear picture of a highly coordinated, malicious financial crime targeting a vulnerable, wealthy woman. Xavier sat completely frozen in his chair, his mouth hanging open in absolute pure terror. He realized in that exact moment that his entire life was completely over. He had handed me the exact digital evidence I needed to send him straight to a federal prison. Vanessa began to cry uncontrollably, realizing that she was now fully implicated in a massive criminal conspiracy and facing severe felony charges. The aggressive false confidence they had walked into the room with was entirely obliterated, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of impending criminal prosecution. They had tried to play a dangerous financial game with a woman who built complex technological empires for a living. They had severely underestimated my intelligence, my resources, and my sheer ruthlessness when protecting my hard-earned wealth. They were now facing decades behind bars for their greed. Xavier's contingency lawyer abruptly stood up from the conference table, shoving his legal pads haphazardly into his briefcase. His face was pale and slick with heavy sweat. He looked at Liam and stammered that he had been completely lied to by his client regarding the nature of the financial transactions. The lawyer stated loudly for the official record that he was immediately withdrawing as legal counsel for Xavier, effective right this second. He knew that staying attached to this massive radioactive fraud case would completely destroy his own legal career and potentially expose him to severe ethical violations. He did not even look at Xavier as he practically sprinted out of the large mahogany doors, leaving his former client completely abandoned and totally legally defenseless. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, echoing loudly in the silent room. Xavier was left sitting entirely alone, facing me and Liam with absolutely zero leverage and no legal protection whatsoever. The arrogant, demanding parasite who had tried to steal my entire life was now a terrified, broken man facing imminent federal criminal charges. I looked across the table at his pale, sweating face and smiled a cold, ruthless smile. The trap had officially snapped completely shut, and there was absolutely no way out. He knew that any apology or excuse would be utterly meaningless in the face of the overwhelming digital evidence resting on the table. I had completely dismantled his entire fake existence piece by piece, leaving him with nothing but the terrifying reality of his own catastrophic failure. The silent guillotine had finally dropped, and his ultimate destruction was now absolutely assured. The room fell into a heavy, dead silence as the court reporter continued typing every single frantic breath he took right now. The heavy mahogany doors of the law firm conference room closed behind us, leaving Xavier and Vanessa trapped in the terrifying reality of their own massive criminal perjury. Liam and I walked in perfect silence toward the private executive elevator. We had just completely decimated their entire fraudulent financial conspiracy on the official legal record, but I knew that our absolute victory was still strictly confined to the silent, sterile walls of that building. When we stepped out into the warm afternoon air of downtown Atlanta, my smartphone immediately began vibrating with another frantic wave of corporate notifications. My executive public relations team was still operating in a state of absolute total panic. The malicious viral video Raven had posted on social media was still actively generating millions of views and thousands of highly aggressive, hateful comments across every single major digital platform. Black Twitter and TikTok were completely tearing my professional reputation to shreds, labeling me a toxic elitist who had cruelly abandoned a young, vulnerable Black girl just to be vindictive. My prominent venture capital investors were repeatedly threatening to pull out of our upcoming corporate acquisitions because the heavily biased media narrative was severely damaging our carefully cultivated financial brand. The board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss my potential temporary suspension. Xavier had truly believed that even if his massive financial crimes were exposed in court, he could still use his daughter's viral emotional performance to hold my corporate empire completely hostage. He thought he could leverage the intense public outrage to force a quiet, lucrative settlement, because he assumed I was deeply terrified of cancel culture. He fundamentally misunderstood the sheer depth of my absolute resolve and the unyielding strength of my corporate governance. I told my private driver to take me directly back to my corporate headquarters in Midtown. I was absolutely not going to negotiate with a cornered parasite, and I was completely determined not to let a spoiled, entitled teenager destroy the $85 million financial technology empire I had sacrificed my entire youth to meticulously build from the ground up. When I arrived at my highly secure office building, I bypassed the standard executive suites and walked directly into the primary crisis management war room. The massive digital monitors covering the walls were flashing red with negative sentiment analysis and crashing engagement metrics. My lead communications director immediately rushed forward, holding a thick stack of drafted apology statements and proposing a highly conservative strategy of quiet, humble reconciliation. She strongly advised me to release a soft, emotional video expressing deep regret and offering to fully reinstate the massive college tuition just to stop the catastrophic public bleeding before the international stock market officially opened on Monday morning. I looked at her with cold, unwavering eyes and calmly instructed her to immediately throw the drafted apologies directly into the industrial shredder. I explicitly told my entire executive team that I was absolutely not going to sit on my bedroom floor in a faded hoodie and cry fake manufactured tears into a shaky smartphone camera. I was a highly successful financial boss who managed millions of dollars in venture capital, and I was going to defend my pristine reputation with the exact same ruthless clinical precision I used to conquer the male-dominated technology sector. I instructed my digital media production team to rent a highly professional studio space immediately and spare absolutely no expense. I hired a premium documentary film crew and told them to set up crisp cinematic lighting against a stark, dark, minimalist background to project total seriousness. I wore a tailored, flawless white designer power suit that projected absolute, unshakable authority and untouched generational wealth. I sat perfectly upright in a sleek, modern chair and looked directly into the high-definition camera lens with cold, steady, unblinking eyes. I did not offer a single apology or any defensive emotional explanations. I simply presented the undeniable, verifiable financial truth to the entire world. I started the high production video by calmly displaying the certified bank statements and the official transaction records on the screen right next to my face. I showed the massive $28,000 tuition transfers to Spelman College, proving with absolute certainty that I had been completely funding her elite education out of my own private pocket, while her biological father contributed absolutely nothing but empty promises. I displayed the official corporate lease documents for the custom white Mercedes G-Wagon, clearly proving that the luxury vehicle she paraded around campus was entirely owned and insured by my private holding company. I showed the staggering credit card statements highlighting her endless daily purchases of designer bags, expensive dinners, and luxury vacations, all paid for by the very same woman she was currently calling a bitter, barren stepmonster. The final piece of evidence I presented was the absolute ultimate weapon in my digital arsenal. I explained to the camera exactly what had happened during the horrific anniversary dinner at the Buckhead Country Club. I detailed how I had quietly activated the high-fidelity voice recording application on my smartphone, while my device was resting discreetly on the dining table. I played the crisp, clear audio recording directly into the high-definition camera, letting the raw, unedited sound file echo through the studio. The entire internet heard the unmistakable, arrogant voice of Xavier, explicitly telling me that Raven was not my daughter, and demanding that I never correct her because I had absolutely no legal or moral right to parent her in any capacity. The audio completely shattered the false social media narrative of the loving, supportive Black father being brutally oppressed by a cruel, wealthy wife. It exposed him instantly as an arrogant, dismissive parasite who only wanted unrestricted access to my money while fiercely rejecting my presence in their personal lives. The recording proved that I was merely complying with his explicit aggressive demands to completely step back from my unearned parental duties. I looked directly into the camera lens and delivered my final closing statement with absolute chilling tranquility. I told the viewers that Xavier was absolutely right about the fundamental nature of our relationship. I calmly stated that I was never allowed to be a real mother or a guiding mentor to Raven. I was only ever expected to be an automated teller machine for a family of highly organized professional con artists who felt completely entitled to the fruits of my relentless labor. I delivered the final text caption that would completely break the internet and instantly reverse the viral momentum. He was absolutely right. I am just the bank, and the bank is now permanently closed. We posted the clinical documentary-style video across LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and all major digital media platforms, simultaneously coordinating the exact release time for maximum global impact. We did not use any desperate emotional hashtags or write long, defensive pleading paragraphs in the description. We simply dropped the overwhelming, irrefutable financial receipts and let the concrete, indisputable data speak entirely for itself. The cultural conversation across the internet shifted with absolute terrifying speed and overwhelming brutal force. The massive online community that had been aggressively attacking me just a few hours ago suddenly turned their collective furious attention entirely onto Raven and Xavier. Black Twitter is notoriously ruthless. when a fake victim is publicly exposed with irrefutable concrete receipts, and they completely dismantled Raven's fabricated story within minutes. The trending hashtags completely changed from boycotting my technology company to mercilessly dragging a parasitic father and his deeply entitled, ungrateful daughter. Prominent cultural commentators and massive digital influencers who had previously condemned my actions immediately released long, detailed retraction videos, apologizing for jumping to conclusions without seeing the financial evidence. They began loudly praising my meticulous financial record-keeping and respectfully calling me the ultimate financial boss of Atlanta. They ruthlessly dissected the staggering tuition bills and the luxury car lease, pointing out the absolute sheer audacity of a teenager who called her wealthy benefactor an evil oppressor, while simultaneously demanding that her elite, luxurious lifestyle be fully funded in perpetuity. The social consequences for Raven were instantaneous and absolutely devastating to her carefully constructed reality. She had built her entire highly curated college identity around being a wealthy elite socialite at Spelman College, pretending that her status was a result of her father's incredible success. She had paraded around the historic campus bragging endlessly about her unlimited black card and her pristine luxury vehicle. When my documentary video dropped, showing that every single luxury she possessed was actually provided by the very same woman she was currently trying to maliciously cancel. The social backlash was completely merciless and inescapable. The prestigious sorority she was desperately trying to join during the highly competitive Rush Week immediately dropped her from their active pledge list, citing a severe violation of their core ethical values. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a proven liar who had publicly tried to destroy a highly successful Black female entrepreneur. Her former college friends completely ostracized her, deleting their pictures with her from their social media feeds and permanently blocking her phone number. She was no longer the wealthy, untouchable princess of the campus. She was just a completely broke, exposed fraud who had just been publicly expelled and humiliated for unpaid tuition. 3 days later, the relentless media firestorm had completely settled into a permanent, highly profitable new reality for my business. My corporate brand was actually remarkably stronger than ever before, because the general public and my elite board of investors now viewed me as a highly intelligent, fiercely independent woman who absolutely refused to be scammed or financially abused by anyone. Our upcoming corporate acquisitions were fully secured. The board of directors issued a statement of unwavering support, and my personal net worth continued to climb steadily upward. The public relations nightmare had been completely transformed into a massive marketing victory that solidified my reputation as an uncompromising titan in the financial technology sector. I was sitting in my silent, peaceful kitchen, drinking a warm cup of freshly brewed espresso, when the external security gate alarm suddenly chimed, disrupting the perfect quiet of the morning. I pulled up the live security feed on my digital tablet and stared intently at the high-definition color screen. Standing outside the heavy iron gates of my secure Buckhead estate was Raven. She had clearly been forced to walk a very long distance or take a cheap public bus because she no longer had access to premium rideshare applications or her repossessed luxury vehicle. Her expensive designer clothes were completely soaked from the heavy freezing afternoon rain, and her face was deeply red and puffy from hours of continuous crying. She was pressing the security buzzer repeatedly while crying genuine, desperate tears directly into the security camera lens. She was not performing for an online audience anymore. She was completely broken and entirely out of options. I watched her standing there shivering in the cold rain, desperately begging for my attention and my mercy, because she had finally realized the ultimate terrifying truth. Xavier and Vanessa were currently facing federal criminal indictments, and they had absolutely no money left to save her from the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world. I watched the high-definition security feed as Raven stood trembling in the freezing Georgia rain. Her expensive silk designer clothes were completely ruined, clinging heavily to her shaking frame. She continued to press the silver intercom button over and over again while sobbing uncontrollably into the camera lens. The spoiled 19-year-old girl who had previously demanded absolute luxury was now utterly reduced to a pathetic, shivering mess. I sat in my warm, quiet kitchen and felt absolutely no sympathy for her current situation. She had made her choices very clearly when she humiliated me at the country club in front of my entire family. She had chosen to align herself with her deceptive father and his massive criminal conspiracy. She thought her fake emotional performance on social media would completely destroy my corporate empire and force me into permanent submission. Instead, she had accidentally triggered her own absolute financial ruin. I placed my empty espresso cup on the pristine quartz counter and decided it was finally time to confront her face to face. I put on a long, heavy cashmere coat and grabbed a large black umbrella from the grand marble foyer before walking outside. The cold rain hit the top of my umbrella with a rhythmic drumming sound as I walked slowly down the long, winding driveway. The heavy iron security gates stood tall and imposing, separating my peaceful sanctuary from the chaotic disaster of her reality. Raven saw me approaching and began to cry even harder, gripping the wet iron bars with her bare hands. She begged me to open the gate and let her inside, claiming she was freezing and had absolutely nowhere else to go. She told me that the federal authorities had just raided Vanessa's luxury penthouse and frozen all their remaining bank accounts. She cried that she was completely locked out of her dormitory and that her sorority sisters were actively ignoring her desperate phone calls. I stood on my side of the iron gate, remaining perfectly dry under my large umbrella, and looked at her with cold, detached eyes. "Please let me in," she pleaded, her voice cracking with genuine raw desperation. "We are family and we are supposed to help each other when things get bad." I looked at the pathetic girl standing in the pouring rain and felt a profound sense of closure. "You made it incredibly clear exactly who your family was at the country club dinner," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and unbothered by the heavy rain. "You loudly announced to the entire world that I was just a bitter, barren stepmonster and a narcissist who oppressed you. You explicitly told my parents that you had no respect for me or my hard-earned wealth. I am not your family, Raven. I am just a wealthy, successful woman you and your father repeatedly tried to scam. And the scam is officially over." Raven fell to her knees on the wet pavement, sobbing heavily and begging for a second chance to make things right. She promised to post another video, telling the world that she had lied about everything. She swore she would do whatever I wanted if I just paid her overdue college tuition so she could go back to her comfortable elite life. I looked down at her and realized she still did not understand the true gravity of her situation. She was not sorry for treating me like garbage. She was only sorry that the endless supply of money had suddenly stopped flowing into her pockets. "You cannot buy your way back into my life with an apology video," I told her softly. "Your father is currently facing decades in federal prison for massive wire fraud and grand larceny. Vanessa is about to be completely homeless and facing her own severe felony charges. Your elite socialite masquerade is permanently finished. You need to get up off the wet ground and figure out how to survive in the real world without using my credit cards." I turned my back on her and began walking slowly up the long driveway toward my warm, secure mansion. Her frantic, desperate screams echoed behind me, blending into the loud, heavy sound of the falling rain. I did not look back a single time. I walked inside my beautiful home and handed my wet umbrella to the household staff. I returned to my quiet kitchen and poured myself another cup of hot, rich espresso. My corporate security team later informed me that Raven eventually stopped crying and walked away into the dark, stormy afternoon, completely abandoned and entirely, utterly alone. The immediate brutal fallout for the parasites unfolded rapidly over the next 48 hours, with devastating clinical precision. I sat in my spacious home office, receiving continuous detailed updates from Liam and my aggressive corporate acquisition team. Xavier experienced the total destruction of his fake consulting empire early the next morning. He had confidently arrived at the prestigious commercial building where he leased his expansive office space, fully expecting to continue his elaborate charade. Instead, he found the heavy glass doors of his suite securely padlocked with a massive, thick steel chain. A formal legal notice of immediate default and commercial eviction was taped firmly to the front glass. Because my quiet subsidiary company had swiftly purchased all of his toxic high-interest corporate debt, I had the absolute legal authority to seize everything inside the office. My security personnel had already entered the suite during the night and completely removed all the expensive leased furniture, the modern computers, and the fake legal documents he used to impress his victims. Xavier stood in the crowded corporate hallway, banging his fists desperately against the locked glass doors while other successful business professionals walked past him in total disgust. He was forcefully escorted out of the building by commercial security guards who warned him never to return. Meanwhile, Vanessa was facing her own catastrophic reality just a few miles away in downtown Atlanta. Liam had coordinated flawlessly with the local sheriff's department to execute the formal foreclosure notice on her luxury penthouse. Vanessa was sitting on her expensive velvet sofa when the armed deputies knocked loudly on her front door. They handed her the final legal paperwork and gave her exactly 30 minutes to pack a single small suitcase with her personal belongings. She screamed and threatened the officers, throwing a massive, violent temper tantrum, but her dramatic performance did absolutely nothing to stop the inevitable eviction. She was escorted out of the glamorous high-rise building, crying hysterically while the neighbors watched the entire humiliating spectacle. The penthouse was immediately secured, and the locks were completely changed, transferring total physical ownership directly to my holding company. Xavier had completely lost his fake business, his stolen wealth, and his carefully crafted public identity in less than 3 days. The massive federal wire fraud investigation was rapidly closing in on him, and he knew an indictment was totally unavoidable. Cornered, desperate men inevitably make catastrophic mistakes when they realize they have absolutely nothing left to lose. Xavier snapped, completely losing whatever tiny shred of rational thought he still possessed. Late Thursday night, he drove a cheap rented sedan toward my highly secure gated community in Buckhead. He had somehow convinced himself that if he could just get inside my mansion and confront me face to face, he could emotionally manipulate me into dropping the charges and giving him his luxurious life back. He drove his car aggressively up to the primary security checkpoint, demanding that the guards open the heavy iron gates immediately. He screamed that he was my legal husband and that he had the absolute right to enter his own property. The highly trained security team remained perfectly calm and firmly informed him that his name had been permanently removed from the authorized access list. They explicitly ordered him to turn his vehicle around and leave the private premises before they contacted local law enforcement. Xavier lost his mind completely. He threw his rented car into reverse, backed up several yards, and then slammed his foot heavily on the gas pedal. He tried to ram his vehicle directly through the reinforced steel security gates. The car crashed violently against the heavy metal barriers, crumpling the front hood and shattering the headlights, but the thick iron gates did not even bend. The loud crash triggered the automated emergency response systems, instantly notifying the local police department. Xavier stumbled out of the wrecked smoking vehicle, his face bleeding slightly from the impact, and tried to climb over the sharp spiked top of the tall security fence. My private security guards rushed out of the guardhouse and forcefully pulled him down to the concrete pavement, pinning his arms securely behind his back. The local police cruisers arrived within exactly 4 minutes, their bright blue and red emergency lights flashing brilliantly against the dark trees. The police officers immediately drew their weapons and ordered Xavier to stop resisting as they placed heavy metal handcuffs tightly around his wrists. Liam had already filed a strict comprehensive restraining order against Xavier earlier that week, citing his severe financial crimes and erratic, dangerous behavior. By violently attempting to breach my secure property, Xavier had blatantly violated a direct judicial order, committing yet another serious felony offense. I stood quietly on the second-floor balcony of my mansion, watching the chaotic scene unfold at the main gate far below. The flashing police lights illuminated the dark driveway, casting long, shifting shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. I watched with absolute cold satisfaction as the police officers forcefully shoved Xavier into the back of a squad car. His expensive designer suit was torn and stained with dirt, and his arrogant pride was completely shattered on the wet concrete. He looked like a pathetic, broken criminal being hauled away to face the absolute ruin of his miserable, parasitic existence. The police cars drove away into the night, taking Xavier directly to the county jail, where he would be booked and processed for multiple severe felony charges. I turned away from the balcony and walked back inside my warm, quiet bedroom, feeling a profound sense of total, absolute victory. I had successfully defended my empire and completely annihilated the enemy who tried to destroy me. A few hours later, I was sitting comfortably in my quiet home office, reviewing some upcoming financial acquisition documents, when my smartphone suddenly rang. The caller identification screen displayed an incoming call originating from the local county detention center. I knew exactly who it was. I accepted the automated charges and lifted the phone slowly to my ear. Xavier spoke into the receiver, his voice trembling with genuine, absolute terror and raw, desperate panic. He was crying heavily, begging me to please pay his bail money and hire him a good defense attorney. He promised he would sign any divorce papers I wanted if I just helped him get out of the cold, terrifying jail cell. I listened to his pathetic sobbing for a long, deliberate moment, letting the profound desperation of his situation fully settle into the quiet room. The man who had confidently told me I had no right to correct his daughter was now begging me to save his pathetic life. "I am sorry, Xavier," I said, my voice perfectly smooth, cold, and completely unbothered. "But as you clearly stated, I am just the bank. And unfortunately for you, the bank is now permanently closed." I hung up the phone, blocking the jail number, and smiled into the beautiful, quiet silence of my secure, impenetrable empire. The relentless storm outside had finally stopped, leaving the dark sky perfectly clear and peaceful. I walked over to my large desk and smoothly powered down my corporate computer monitor for the night. The long, brutal war was completely over. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine and happily celebrated my absolute true freedom. The bright, early morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the massive Fulton County Courthouse, casting shadows across the wooden benches of the gallery. I sat beside Liam at the plaintiff's table, wearing a tailored emerald suit, projecting calm and authority. Today was the final hearing to dissolve my marriage to Xavier and sever every remaining tie between us. Xavier sat at the defense table looking terrible. He had lost weight, and his cheap, wrinkled suit hung loosely on his frame, a sharp contrast to the designer clothes I used to buy for him. His court-appointed attorney looked bored and exhausted, knowing he was fighting an unwinnable battle. I glanced back at the gallery and saw Vanessa sitting in the second row. She was wearing a faded, simple dress, stripped of her previous luxury. She chewed on her fingernails, watching with terrified eyes as she witnessed her stolen lifestyle evaporate into thin air. The presiding judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, called the court to order. The room fell into a heavy silence as she adjusted her glasses and looked at the digital transcripts and financial records Liam had submitted. The judge stated for the official record that she had reviewed the evidence of financial fraud, massive perjury, and grand larceny committed by the defendant. She noted the decrypted chat logs and bank statements proving Xavier and Vanessa had conspired to steal $600,000 from my secondary accounts. The judge looked at Xavier with an expression of profound disgust. She declared that in all her years on the bench, she had rarely seen such a calculated, parasitic scheme to defraud a successful spouse. Because of the proof of wire fraud and federal perjury, the judge delivered her final ruling. With swift efficiency, she formally finalized the divorce, granting my petition. Entirely, she stated that because of his criminal behavior and the ironclad nature of my irrevocable blind trust, Xavier was legally entitled to nothing. He would receive 0 spousal support, 0 assets, and 0 equity. In my technology company, he was walking away with exactly what he brought into the marriage, which was nothing at all. Xavier slumped forward in his wooden chair, burying his face in his hands as the crushing reality of his total financial ruin washed over him. But the judge was not finished yet. She adjusted her microphone and delivered the next blow. She ordered Xavier to pay back the entire $600,000 in financial restitution. She stated that the stolen funds must be returned to my holding company immediately, and his wages would be garnished until the debt was satisfied. Vanessa let out a loud gasp from the gallery, realizing she would be held jointly liable for the criminal restitution. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing as the heavy weight of her impending poverty finally crushed her fake socialite dreams. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Two federal agents wearing dark suits walked straight down the center aisle. The judge nodded to them, acknowledging their presence. She informed Xavier that due to the evidence of wire fraud and criminal conspiracy, a federal grand jury had indicted him that morning. The civil proceedings were now finalized, but his federal nightmare was just beginning. The agents walked up to the defense table and ordered Xavier to stand up. He was trembling so badly that his lawyer had to help him to his feet. The metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the silent courtroom. Xavier looked at me with tears streaming down his face, silently begging for mercy. But I just stared back with cold, empty eyes. He was escorted out of the courtroom by the federal agents walking right past Vanessa, who was weeping hysterically in the gallery. Liam stood up from our table and approached the bench. He handed the judge the final paperwork to close the divorce proceedings. The judge signed the documents with a swift motion and looked directly at me. She offered a rare smile of professional respect. She formally commended me on the official record for my meticulous corporate governance and financial record-keeping. She stated that my dedication to protecting my assets had not only saved my tech empire, but had also removed a dangerous predator. From the streets of Atlanta, it was the ultimate legal validation of my life's work, destroying the malicious narrative Xavier built. Liam and I gathered our briefcases and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, leaving the crying remnants of Vanessa behind us. When we pushed through the double doors and stepped into the busy courthouse hallway, we were confronted by Xavier's furious mother. She had been waiting outside, pacing angrily across the tile floor. When she saw me, she let out a loud scream and lunged forward, raising her hand to slap my face. She blamed me for her son's arrest and destruction, but she never even came close to touching me. Liam stepped in front of me, blocking her path, while two armed court security guards grabbed her arms and restrained her against the marble wall. She continued to scream and thrash as they threatened to arrest her for assaulting a witness. I did not even break my stride. I walked straight past her, screaming frantic face without showing fear or hesitation. I pushed open the heavy glass exit doors and stepped into the bright Atlanta sun. The crisp air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. Liam walked beside me, a quiet, satisfied smile playing on his lips. We walked down the wide concrete steps of the courthouse, untouched and victorious. The dark storm of lies, manipulation, and greed was permanently behind me. Now I had defended my empire, protected my peace, and destroyed the people who tried to use my excellence for their own gain. I was a wealthy, unstoppable woman, and my new beautiful life was just beginning. 6 months have passed since that victorious morning on the courthouse steps, and the quiet, absolute peace I secured that day has only grown stronger. The heavy debris of my former fake marriage has been entirely cleared away, leaving nothing but fertile ground for my true legacy to flourish. I rarely think about Xavier or the parasitic family that tried to drain my life force, but the legal system did exactly what it was designed to do. The federal prosecutors were absolutely merciless with the mountains of digital evidence we provided. Xavier is currently serving a mandatory 3-year sentence in a federal correctional facility for wire fraud and grand larceny. His tailored designer suits have been permanently replaced by a standard-issue orange prison uniform. His arrogant, booming voice has been reduced to making desperate collect calls that nobody bothers to answer anymore. He is completely isolated from the wealthy Atlanta society he tried so desperately to infiltrate. Vanessa is no longer lounging in luxury penthouses or pretending to be an untouchable, wealthy, elite socialite. My corporate acquisition of her debt completely annihilated her fake reality. She was forced to declare immediate total bankruptcy when she was violently evicted from her beautiful Buckhead home. She now works long, grueling shifts at a minimum wage retail store in a dying suburban strip mall. She spends her incredibly exhausting days folding cheap clothes for rude, ungrateful customers while drowning in the massive court-ordered financial restitution she still owes my corporate holding company. There is no more designer jewelry or fancy brunch dates for her, just the harsh, unforgiving reality of living paycheck to paycheck with a ruined credit score. And Raven, the spoiled 19-year-old girl who once called my parents ghetto and paraded around the prestigious Spelman College campus on my dime, faced the absolute harshest reality check of all. She was completely stripped of her fake elite status and permanently blacklisted by every single prestigious sorority in the entire city. She was forced to drop out of her university entirely because she had absolutely no access to my deep pockets. She is now enrolled in basic remedial classes at a local public community college. To pay for her highly modest tuition, she works the late-night shift at a fast food drive-thru, wearing a greasy paper visor and handing out cheap French fries to the exact same wealthy peers she used to mercilessly mock. The brutal wheel of karma turned with absolute flawless precision, completely balancing the scales of justice and stripping her of everything she took for granted. But I am absolutely not dwelling on their pathetic, inevitable downfalls. My mind is entirely focused on the brilliant, expansive future I am actively creating right now. The scene of my ultimate triumph is not a sterile legal courtroom, but a massive, glamorous charity gala taking place in the grand primary ballroom of the Georgia Aquarium. The room is flooded with ethereal blue light from the massive water exhibits, and the soft, elegant hum of hundreds of powerful, intelligent voices echoes beautifully off the tall glass walls. Tonight is the official launch of my most important corporate initiative yet. I am standing in the center of the magnificent room, surrounded by the absolute true pinnacle of Black excellence in the modern financial sector. Tonight, I am officially unveiling a massive $10 million corporate incubator fund entirely dedicated to aggressively financing young, brilliant African American women breaking into the highly competitive fields of science, technology, engineering, and financial mathematics. I created this massive generational wealth vehicle to ensure that young, brilliant Black girls never have to sleep on cold, hard office floors or beg arrogant, dismissive men for a basic seat at the table the way I once did. I am actively building an impenetrable fortress of modern generational wealth, and I am handing the golden keys directly to the hardworking women who actually deserve them. My real, authentic family is standing right beside me, sharing in this glorious moment of absolute pure triumph. My mother Shirley looks absolutely radiant and beautiful in a deep purple evening gown. She holds my hand tightly, her eyes shining with genuine warm tears of sheer pride. My father Elijah wraps his strong, supportive arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. He looks at me with profound, deep respect and quietly apologizes for ever doubting my absolute fierce strength during the dark, chaotic days of the media scandal. They both tell me how incredibly proud they are of the unstoppable, wealthy woman I have officially become. Monique stands on my other side, laughing joyfully while holding a tall crystal glass of expensive champagne. Liam stands just behind her, surveying the glamorous packed room with his sharp, calculating, icy blue eyes, keeping a protective, watchful, legal gaze over our entire family unit. We are a united, unbreakable front that no predator can ever breach again. The master of ceremonies calls my name over the loudspeakers, and the entire ballroom erupts into deafening, thunderous applause. I walk smoothly toward the illuminated glass podium, my diamond heels clicking confidently against the polished wooden stage. I look out over the massive crowd of driven, independent, brilliant women, looking back at me with absolute sheer inspiration in their eyes. They are the future corporate leaders, the brilliant innovators, and the absolute titans of the modern technology industry. I lean toward the silver microphone, feeling the immense quiet power radiating completely through my entire body. I smile a real victorious, fully earned smile. They told me I was just a wallet. I say, my voice ringing clear and absolute across the silent, captive room. They thought they could drain my living spirit and reduce my entire human existence to a simple, limitless bank account. They were completely, horribly wrong. I am not just the bank. I tell the crowd, looking at the bright, beautiful future standing right in front of me. I am the entire Federal Reserve, and from this day forward, I alone decide exactly who gets funded. The thunderous applause that follows my words is the only validation I will ever need. The long, exhausting war is officially over, and my beautiful, untouchable empire stands taller and stronger than ever before. The greatest lesson from this journey is that true wealth is not just about the money you accumulate, but the strong boundaries you are willing to enforce to protect your peace. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are only in love with the comfort and luxury you provide them. When you strip away the financial support, their true character is quickly revealed. Never allow anyone to make you feel small in the very empire you built with your own hands. Standing up for your dignity might cost you a relationship, but it will save your entire human soul. If you have ever had to cut off toxic people to protect your hard-earned peace, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of absolute resilience and ultimate triumph.